All right, well, good morning, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Stephen Ezel, the Vice President of Global Innovation Policy at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, and we welcome you to today's event discussing how leading US states are developing their own sophisticated advanced manufacturing strategies designed to bolster their state's manufacturing workforce skills and to strengthen the position of their manufacturers in regional, national, and global supply chains. We're going to have two panels this morning with 4 speakers each. The first focused on state-level manufacturing workforce development policies, and the second on integration of manufacturers into supply chains. But before we roll into the panels today, I want to acknowledge my colleagues and co-conspirators in organizing this event, Bill Bonvillian and David Adler. Bill Bonvillian is the former director of MIT's Washington office and a professor at MIT in Georgetown, as well as an author of the wonderful book, Technological Innovation in Legacy Sectors. He'll join us at the end of today's session to provide some closing remarks. I'm also joined by my colleague, David Adler, who is an economics author who has written extensively in publications such as American Affairs, Barron's, City Journal, and the Financial Times about finding ways to revive and strengthen American national economic developmentism. David is a producer of several public policy documentaries for the BBC and PBS, including Mind Over Money and America's Crisis in Healthcare and Retirement. David holds a master's in economics from Columbia University and an undergrad degree in economics from Oxford University. So I'm going to turn it over to David to provide a few minutes of opening remarks, level setting about how we've decided to organize today's event and put it together. Let me also add for our audience that if you have questions, you can submit them on the Slido application found on the event page at the bottom of the screen. Submit your questions there. We'll ask them to the audience later. With that, David, let me turn it over to you for a few minutes of opening remarks.
Hi, thanks for that. Thanks everyone for joining. Again, to introduce myself, I'm one of the organizers along with Bill Bonvillian, who will join us at the end, and Stephen, and I need to thank everyone at ITIF. So just to tell you, what is the motivation for today's event? It is actually ideological, believe it or not. That is, it's recognizing that there's long been a hostility or resistance to national industrial policy at the national level, but that's not been true at the state level, where state leaders actually are charged with developing their economies. They don't face the same ideological headwinds, or maybe a better term is doldrums, that has often marked the national scene. And even if that's changing nationally, states are still worth looking at regardless, because as Clyde Prestowitz wrote to me, and I think he's probably in the audience, I hope, is that states are a key element of any serious national development program. So in other words, states are a little bit overlooked, but they deserve to be better known, and they're doing some interesting things. Now, before I get overly enthusiastic, there are some limitations with state-based policies. There are limited resources. States do not control currency, tariffs. But the biggest limitation is state industrial policy or manufacturing policy is typically seen as tax policy, where states use tax incentives to lure other companies that were probably going to locate there anyway. So you end up with a race to the bottom, no national improvement, and not a very helpful approach to development. But maybe a key point of this webinar is that's not the whole picture. States are doing many other things than that deserve to be better known. So really, I think this message here is that my fellow organizers and I, and actually some of the panelists, have identified some really interesting state level manufacturing programs, both in workforce and supply chains, that deserve to be better known. And that's, hopefully they'll be shared here today. And there are, again, a lot of open questions here about how states and the government, federal government, could work better together, given a lot of the programs actually are in fact federally funded or partially federally funded. We'll learn that today, but perhaps, or maybe in another webinar. But in conclusion, basically the whole point, hopefully we'll learn interesting things. States are doing things that deserve to be better known, that they could be a model for other states, and therefore this is a state policy conference. It actually could have national implications. And with that, I'll turn it over to Stephen, our first moderator and panelist.
Thank you very much, David. Your remarks actually align perfectly with the report ITIF actually released yesterday called Time for a Federal State Economic Development Partnership. And that report actually lays out a number of ideas about how federal policies can stimulate state level manufacturing innovation through policies such as a grant program to states to help them develop advanced manufacturing strategies, similarly expanding the Regional Innovation Strategies Program, expanding NISTA's Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program, and even establishing a grant program for states to attract foreign direct investment or reshoring advanced technology production to the United States. So this is a good report pointing out the opportunity for federal policies to amplify the great things we're going to hear today going on at the state level. But with that, let me introduce my four panelists for our first panel here on state level manufacturing workforce development policies. We're first going to hear from Farhad Vazagoo, who is the interim director of the Center for Advanced Manufacturing at MassTech Collaborative, where he manages several programs, including the work of the Advanced Manufacturing Collaborative AMC and investments made under the Massachusetts Manufacturing Innovation Initiative, or M212, a program from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to advance innovation and job growth in key advanced manufacturing sectors. Before joining MassTech, Farhad served as Director of Technology and Functional Safety Products in the Automotive Business Unit at Analog Devices and held various engineering programs with Fairchild Semiconductors. He holds a bachelor's degree in electrical and electronic engineering from the University of Manchester. After Farhad, we'll hear from Ira Moskowitz, who was the CEO of ARM, the Advanced Robotics for Manufacturing Institute, one of America's 60 now Manufacturing USA institutes, whose mission is to accelerate the adoption of transformative robotics technologies that are the foundation for every advanced manufacturing activity. Prior to his role as CEO at ARM, Mr. Moskowitz served as Director of Advanced Manufacturing Programs for the Massachusetts Technology Collaborative. And before that, he spent 30 years managing global semiconductor technology development programs for companies such as Analog Devices, where he was Vice President and General Manager of US Operations. Ira holds an MBA from NYU and a Master's of Science in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science from MIT. After Ira, we're delighted to have Amy Firestone join us. Amy is a Vice President of Apprenticeship Carolina with the South Carolina Technical College System, where she leads a multidisciplinary team of consultants in expanding youth and adult apprenticeship opportunities across the state. Before joining Apprenticeship Carolina, Dr. Firestone served as the Dean of Continuing Education and Professional Development of Miami-Dade College. She previously served as a Senior Advisor on Education in the Office of Apprenticeship for the U.S. Department of Labor. She holds a master's degree in Latin American Studies and a doctoral degree in Spanish sociolinguistics from the University of Illinois, as well as a published author on urban youth in Peru. Finally, we will hear from Michael Britt Crane, who is the Education and Workforce Development Lead at the Department of Defense Manufacturing Technology Program Office, where he works with the education and workforce development staff members across the Manufacturing USA Institutes to support the development of programs that impact manufacturing workers and students in advanced manufacturing technologies. Before joining the DOD Manufacturing Technology Program Office, Michael was a mechanical engineer at the Naval Surface Warfare Center Cataract Division. He holds a degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Virginia. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the panelists for about 7 minutes of remarks, and then we will have a discussion and take questions from the audience. Thank you, and Farhad, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that introduction, Stephen. MassTech has been around for over 35 years. Our agency has strengthened the competitiveness of the tech and innovation economy in Massachusetts by driving strategic investment, partnership, and insight that harness the talents of Massachusetts. As a unique public agency, MassTech supports business formation and growth in the state's technology sector, helping Massachusetts lead in the global digital economy. And to achieve that goal, we build strategies, strengthen connections, assist companies, making investments, and lead programs. Develop meaningful collaboration across industry, academia, and government, turning shared challenges into economic opportunity, and support the Commonwealth's tech sector with a strategic focus on talent, ecosystems, innovation infrastructure across key divisions and programs. I would like to take a moment to thank Ira Moskowitz in particular. Prior to his role with ARM, Ira and I worked together here at MassTech on advanced manufacturing programs, and prior to that in industry. And now we're glad to partner with him at ARM. Manufacturing is a critical part of our Commonwealth's innovation economy, and we've made it a priority to support and boost manufacturing across the Commonwealth. MassTech has been growing its work in the area of advanced manufacturing growing exponentially this year. While we are mostly focused on one specific program called M2I2, we have expanded our projects and have recently launched a new division called the Center for Advanced Manufacturing. We're focused on infrastructure investment and in talent development programs built around three core principles: competitive supply chain, connected innovation ecosystem, growing talent. Our legacy program is the Massachusetts Manufacturing Innovation Initiative, or M2I2 for short. The administration of Governor Charlie Baker and Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito has committed more than $100 million to driving advanced manufacturing through these programs, which build around the Manufacturing USA program. To date, we've invested over $17 million. We see this as a substantial and nation-leading commitment by our state to develop the Manufacturing USA infrastructure within the state. While there is probably activity in all 15 Manufacturing USA institutes within our state, we have committed capital investment in 4 institutes: Advanced Functional Fabrics of America, or otherwise known as AFOA, Advanced Robotic for Manufacturing, or ARM, Advanced Integrated Photonics Manufacturing, or AIM Photonics, Flexible Hybrid Electronics, or otherwise known as NextFlex. Massachusetts sees the potential for national and global leadership in these 4 sectors. Manufacturing increasingly relies on advanced and emerging technologies, and that is extremely true for companies across our state. Through M2I2, we have a great opportunity to grow individual companies, develop B2B partnership within our state, and collaboration between companies and R&D centers in our state. M2I2 builds upon the state's superior academics, R&D, deep innovation ecosystem, and long history of manufacturing. M2I2 deepens these assets by linking Massachusetts companies, universities, community colleges, vocational schools, national labs, new ventures, governments, and Manufacturing USA, and propels advanced manufacturing across ecosystem, new jobs, products, and revenues, and new partnerships and supply chains, and new employee skills. Looking more broadly at workforce development, we are playing at all levels. Massachusetts invests in infrastructure at our public vocational schools. Our investments are focused on connection to employers, focused on training and skills development. We have toured private sector firms that are M2I2 grantees. We see the talent pipeline at work. The professors seeing students they've taught working at the cutting edge machines. The same machines, M2I2 is making those same machines available, accessible to students while they're at school, either by establishing infrastructure at the university, which we normally call them for lab or education and prototyping location or discovery centers, or placing it at a company, but making it accessible for broad training programs in the region. Many of the university-based investments we made built around the partnership model. Companies are utilizing these centers as less as training grounds, but R&D skunk works, working with faculty, students on product innovation and next generation thinking. I want to also thank Department of Defense and Michael Brick Crane at Mantech last month, as we were able to announce a new grant from their Office for Mass Bridge. This builds off our success with M2I2 and collaborative network we've created across the state. This is a $3.2 million grant. It's an exciting opportunity for Massachusetts to pilot a manufacturing training program, one that could serve as a model for the rest of the United States. Through MassBridge, we will develop and test a state-based training and career pathway model for manufacturing technicians that meet the needs of Manufacturing USA Institute and their members. The Bridge program will boost training opportunities for technicians and better meet the workforce needs of employers. The Bridge will be led by MassTech and will work closely with my office, as well as the Office of Education, Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development, MassHire, MIT, the Massachusetts MEP, and so many others. The program will build in our existing vocational programs, along with high schools, community colleges, and universities to connect and engage students to encourage them towards careers in the Manufacturing USA sectors. In closing, I hope I've been giving you a good picture of manufacturing work that we're conducting in Massachusetts. I would like to thank you, Stephen and ITA, for hosting me today, and I'm happy to discuss any aspect of our work. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ira Moskovitz, ARM CEO. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Farhad, and thank you for that kind comment from my friend and former partner in crime there in Massachusetts. First of all, we are at the Arm Institute a national federally funded institute, and our mission is a national mission. But we have a dual mission. It's both to develop and accelerate advanced, innovative robotics technology. That really is the fundamental foundation of almost all advanced manufacturing activity, but it is also simultaneously to develop training programs that help empower the workers and allow them to develop skills in these key areas. And one of the important things to emphasize, even though we are a federal entity, is that our main focus is on technician training with respect to workforce. And that's because our membership, which is 280 members and counting, of the leading robotics and automation companies and academic institutions, government agencies, nonprofits, really face technician shortages as one of their biggest problems. In my 30 years running manufacturing lines, that was certainly true. And certainly the increased use of automation and robotics will play a crucial role in developing a national resiliency for things like we are experiencing now as a pandemic, but it'll only work if we develop a robotics and automation ready workforce. The other thing about technicians is technician training is done in the States. It's done by the community colleges, vocational high schools, and other entities. Technicians in our workforce tend to come out of the States, and they tend to work and stay regionally. So it's important as a federal entity that we develop programs that can help reinforce and support those state-based efforts that produce these critical technicians. And David was talking about the challenges of sometimes the federal entities to do things where the states are much more proactive. But in our case, we really see that as our mission to develop, to take the leverage that we have as a federal funded entity and support and promote those kinds of activities in the states. And this is what we're currently doing at the Arm Institute. Using our access to the Department of Defense and government entities and our 280 members, what we did first is we identified what the career pathways actually look like for robotics technicians at different levels. And we developed through our connections and our networks and our members a standardized language around what robotics technicians actually are and what do you call them at different levels of performance. Secondly, we identified and standardized the required competencies and skills for those specific robotics pathways. What we did third is what we're doing now is compiling, describing, and promoting the training assets across the country and including in every state that provide such competencies in a single place that's comprehensive and yet accessible for the entire nation, so that employers and workers in the individual states can use this asset map and find the actual academic programs that meet their needs for specific types of technicians. And finally, what we're developing is a deep dive evaluation process, an endorsement process, kind of like ISO, that we're developing for those entities that want to engage that in the asset map across all the states, that we can then deliver to them an analysis of their strengths and weaknesses based on the national competency model that we've standardized, and provide an improvement plans and eventually an endorsement when they qualify from a national entity, the Arm Institute. And that again is based on the best practices from across our 280 membership that really represents the leading companies and government agencies and academic institutions from universities down to vocational high schools that are really the kind of the brain trust of how you do robotics, automation, and AI training. So this whole website and the system is called the Asset Management System, or AMS, and eventually it'll actually list job openings within the regions that are corresponding to the specific skills that students develop for robotics. So with the support of the Department of Defense and our academic and industry partners, we've launched the website. It will be live early in 2021. It is roboticscareer.org. Roboticscareer.org, one word, will be the name of the website. You can find more about it at roboticscareer.org, although it's not live yet, or on our website, the Arm Institute's website. But it really will be the nation's most comprehensive list of career pathways, education providers, and endorsements that regions, states, communities, towns can use for both employers and workers to identify the best place for them to get the best education. We currently have over 8,000 academic programs listed in the prototype system, not live yet, will be around February we expect over 10,000 programs across the country where people across states can actually search within their own states and find the descriptions of standardized technician roles and levels, the types of competence required, the education opportunities within their state, and eventually endorsements that will be able to help folks find the right quality for their needs. And again, you can find this on our website. And just coming back to the first point I made before, my experience certainly with technicians and technicians training is they come from a certain state, they get their training within the state, they tend to stay in the state. But from my experience also working for a state, states sometimes tend to struggle to try to get their arms around such a comprehensive program that they can utilize to benefit in their state. So that's what we're working on at the ARM Institute, and I'm happy to take questions on that and on that effort later. And now I'm very pleased to turn it over to our next speaker, Amy Firestone.
Well, thank you very much, Ira. I'm very pleased to be here, and thanks to ITIP for the opportunity to talk about workforce development and especially Apprenticeship Carolina. I think Ira, what you were talking about really resonates with what I'm going to describe with the efforts in South Carolina to help support technicians, machine operators, and many of these other types of occupations that have an urgent need. First, I want to start out and tell you all a little bit about Apprenticeship Carolina. As you heard in the introductions, we're part of the South Carolina Technical College system. And as the Vice President, I lead this team, and we are a statewide effort with consultants, program coordinators, registered program specialists, youth apprenticeship coordinators, and many other roles that work directly with employers and the 16 technical colleges in the state. A little bit about our mission. We are posed to help lead registered apprenticeships in the state, serving as a statewide intermediary with the U.S. Department of Labor. We help promote apprenticeships. We help employers utilize their programs so they have a maximum benefit. And we're very focused on career pathways. So that's starting from high school with youth apprenticeship programs all the way until associates and eventually going into bachelor's degree programs, all aligned with employer demand through apprenticeship programs. So a little bit about us. We've been very successful since our inception in 2007. We have currently 1,093 companies that are working with registered apprenticeships in South Carolina, and a little bit under a third are in the manufacturing industry. And I'll talk a little bit more about manufacturing and how companies have benefited from apprenticeships in this industry in a minute. But out of the 1,093 companies, we continue to grow very exponentially. About, I would say, a third of those companies have a youth apprenticeship program, which means that high school students are earning and learning, and they're growing their career as early as age 16. So along with those numbers, I also wanted to tell you a little bit about what is a registered apprenticeship and how this is a great solution for many different companies, but especially the manufacturing industry. So registered apprenticeships are all registered with the U.S. Department of Labor in South Carolina. And these programs are an earn while you learn, which means that individuals are earning a paycheck while they are studying the material at a technical college in the state or at their high schools. And they're also working on the job with a mentor. So all of their work is being supervised. And through the apprenticeship, the employees, which can be 16, 40, 50, any age, can move through entry level to become fully competent in different occupations. And out of our top 6 occupations, I would say about a third of them are in manufacturing as machine operators, maintenance technicians. And some of our largest apprenticeship programs are with Michelin. We also have Nephron Pharmaceuticals. Many large and even very small companies have been manufacturing companies have been utilizing registered apprenticeships as a solution. And I say, what is the secret sauce? I think, Ira, you were talking a lot about states and policies and practices and how we can really wrap our arms around different strategies. Well, in Apprenticeship Carolina, what I would say is one of the main ingredients to our success is having a consultant work one-on-one from our team with a company to help them develop their program, utilizing industry templates for different occupations, and make sure that the program really addresses needs with new technology that may emerge, different techniques, strategies, any way in which the company wants to expand their program. And that process, like I said, is a one-on-one process with our team. And we also help work very closely with the technical colleges and bring in different experts to help design the curriculum, as well as recruitment, which is very important. So all of our programs are demand driven. And so while there might be some great programs that are offered at the technical colleges, we meet, as I said, one-on-one with employers to help ask, what is their process? What is their discovery? What are their needs? We walk them through what we call a 3D process. And that's discovery, design, and delivery. And that's what I was talking about with that one-on-one customization of the apprenticeship, because one of our most well-known programs is with Scheffler. And they've had an apprenticeship program at 2 of their plants in South Carolina for, one of them probably close to 40 years. However, just recently, they realized they needed to update their program to meet some of the new technology that they're going to be implementing. So we work with them on that process to ensure that they can train their apprentices in that latest technology and that those apprentices get certified as needed. So that's a little bit about our process and how we've been working with manufacturing companies. And I will share that the return on investment for these companies that participate in apprenticeships is very high in South Carolina. Just last year, we did a study with the University of South Carolina with over 200 companies, and most of them were in manufacturing. And for every dollar invested, about 26 cents were earned. And then they found that the average rate of tenure for an employee who went through an apprenticeship was almost 3 years longer than the average employee. So some of that preliminary data shows us a positive return on investment. And then just a few months ago, we published our first study on youth apprenticeship, which had a very heavy focus on manufacturing. And the return on investment was even a little bit higher. For every dollar a company invested, there was a $1.45 return on investment. And many companies found that the opportunity to work with a 16, 17, 18-year-old and mold them from scratch, as you'll say, was highly beneficial to helping retain and help train employees as they move on to the post-secondary level. So that's a little bit about us and about the success that we've had in the state. I'll be glad to share more later, but I did want to mention that we are in full expansion mode. And on July 1st, Apprenticeship Carolina received $11.5 million from the U.S. Department of Labor to expand apprenticeships, working closely with industry partners around the state, as well as associations, to help modernize apprenticeships and develop new standards for apprenticeships, and also help with promotion and more personnel around the state to support companies with that one-on-one process. So one of our initiatives is the Youth Apprenticeship Readiness Grant, and we're very excited to be one of 14 organizations nationally to receive this grant. This grant will support high growth industries such as manufacturing that do have a $76,000 annual salary in South Carolina. So high growth, helping youth from 16 and up enter careers in manufacturing and other high growth industries, because we know right now there's about 260,000 jobs in manufacturing in South Carolina. So the Youth Apprenticeship Grant will help us project for the next 4 years. We also receive a state apprenticeship expansion grant, close to $7 million, to significantly support different high growth industries and also new programs with tuition for students in South Carolina. And both of the grants approximately about $5 million in scholarships. So those are just some opportunities that we have right now, and looking forward to talking more with the audience and sharing more information. So thank you very much. Now I'll turn it over to Michael.
Michael.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you to ITIF for hosting this illustrious panel here. So the Department of Defense has a very strong interest in a robust manufacturing sector to support our weapon systems, our warfighter, national security, and economic security. So as has been mentioned, the DoD has invested pretty heavily in this. We have 9 now public-private partnerships, the Manufacturing Innovation Institutes, alongside a few more by the department that are sponsored by the Department of Energy and Department of Commerce. And the institutes have this 2-pronged or 3-pronged mission, really, to develop and commercialize these advanced manufacturing technologies, develop the ecosystem around them, through their membership, and to develop the workforce that's needed to realize the benefits of these technologies at scale. As I think we all know, during the Great Recession, we lost a vast swath of our manufacturing capability in the United States, and the DoD and the other federal agencies recognize the importance of Industry 4.0 technologies, productivity enhancing technologies, to bring back manufacturing and grow the sector so that it's stronger than ever, by embracing these productivity enhancing technologies that make it really economically viable for leading firms to produce in the United States. So these public-private partnerships, I think, are really powerful. Obviously, there's a huge benefit to investment at the federal level, but that really needs to be carried out at a localized and state level. So Amy mentioned the Department of Labor grant that's enabling their program to succeed in South Carolina. And I think that's emblematic of the model here, right? Federal agencies can provide some leadership here, can provide investment, but that really needs to, the control and implementation of that needs to be carried out at a state and a local level, because each individual ecosystem has its own hand to play, its own manufacturers, its own educational institutions, challenges they're addressing, and so on. So primarily in the DoD Mantech program, we're working with the Manufacturing Innovation Institutes. And again, we see them as central to this endeavor because of the role that technology is playing in this revitalization effort for manufacturing in the United States. And a lot of the activity, as I think Ira provided a very good example with ARM, the Robotics Institute, is catalytic in nature. Many of the institutes are developing curriculum for these emerging technologies where it doesn't exist, but in the case of robotics, a lot of these training programs exist. And the bigger challenge is identifying the ones that are worthwhile, that are really cutting edge and are going to provide the best benefit to students and to employers. So I think that provides a really good example. So at the DoD, we're working across all 9 of the institutes that we sponsor, but also with the greater network of 16 to help coordinate our activities in education and workforce development. There's so much commonality across these technologies that it really makes sense for the institutes to work together on this, and for them to partner with state and local actors to really develop the educational pathways that are needed to close the skills gap that we've seen in reports like the 2018 Deloitte report of millions of jobs going unfilled, right? So the Mass Bridge project that Farhad mentioned is I think a really good example. Ira and Farhad worked together with us to develop this project. And Massachusetts brought forward its own investment, its own network, but most importantly, a very diverse coalition across the 4 regions of the state of Massachusetts to put together a really compelling plan to integrate advanced manufacturing technologies in their vocational education system across the state. And they brought this set of partners that really would have been impossible for us to reach otherwise. So we decided to make this investment, and the goal is, of course, to enhance the manufacturing workforce in the state of Massachusetts, but further to develop a model to work with other states down the line, so that we can replicate the success of this program as it develops. It's still in its first year. We're not ready to start replicating that yet, but that is the goal of that program. So the institutes, again, are leading in this technology commercialization and the integration of technology development and commercialization with the education activity. Amy mentioned the importance of demand-driven programs. It's absolutely vital that the educational pathways are informed by an industry demand for talent. Otherwise, students aren't going to be, reaching the jobs where they're really needed. And with the help of the institutes, we're able to take this one step farther, starting with that demand-driven nature of developing these educational pathways, informed by things like the competency modeling that Ira mentioned at ARM, which is really forward-looking, understanding where the technology is today and where that's going in the next few years, something that the demand signal from our small and mid-sized manufacturers in particular won't necessarily fully capture. So we have that demand signal, we have that intelligence about the state of the technology and where it's going, and we're able to bring those in as inputs to craft educational pathways that are going to bring value in their given region, especially in the skilled technical workforce. It's really important to have that regional focus and that regionalized demand signal, but they're also going to have value going forward and help to promote the adoption of these technologies by having that forward-looking component to educate the students on the technology where it is today and where it's going in the future. And that can only be done by developing these educational programs by the technology commercializers, right? By those who can see that. So again, the institutes, each one has a little bit of a different mission. I think Ira provided a really good example of one of the institutes with a technology that's a little bit more mature, although it's evolving very rapidly. But some of our other institutes in biomanufacturing and integrated photonics are really pushing forward emergent technologies. And in that space, there's a need to develop a lot of new curriculum because it just doesn't exist yet. And so for that reason, the DoD are investing in an open edX digital learning platform for the institutes to host their learning technology, so for one purpose is to be able to have this cutting edge pedagogy available for all these programs. This is something that will make this curriculum available to any program across the country who wants to invest in developing talent in these technology areas, but also enable these capabilities to be applied to the Department of Defense workforce, because we have our own direct interest in these technologies, not only for the industrial base, but for our activity, for our workforce of scientists, engineers, technicians, maintenance personnel, et cetera, across the country, which is quite substantial. And it's really important for us to adopt these technologies as well. So just bringing it back to the theme of the session here, we really need to take a holistic approach. And I think there's a big role that the federal government can take in leadership and investment and connectivity and engagement with partners. But the work being done to actually reach students is done at the state and local level. And we need partners like our distinguished panelists to really realize that in a productive fashion. So thank you, and I'll turn back over to Steve.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, and to Amy, Ira, and Farhad for your excellent opening remarks. So we are going to bring our panelists back onto the stage in gallery view, I understand. Fantastic. All right, so let me first ask our panelists if there was something you heard in one of your fellow panelists' presentations that you'd like to comment or remark upon, or that particularly struck you as of interest or note.
Well, one of the things that I think is a common theme is that, and I think Michael and others had mentioned it, is that the training does happen locally. And so the states, and in fact down to towns and communities, have the expertise not only on their own constituencies, what the special needs are in the demographics, what their local industry is, and what the needs are of the local industry, and so on. So it's very important that this be a marriage between the two, because at a federal level, you can't have that kind of understanding of what that particular community needs for their people, their industry, what state it's at, what their economic challenges are, and so on. So I just think it's a recurring theme that those of us that work at the federal level have to make sure that we're reaching out and understanding and prototyping things at the local level that can be reproduced and modified. And I think folks at the local level have to be aware of federal initiatives so they can leverage that, because of the huge resources that the institutes, like Michael talked about, can leverage hundreds of millions of dollars in each institute to solve problems that an individual community or even an individual state may not have the leverage to do.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ira. Let me remind our audience that you can submit questions on the Slido application on the event homepage. We do have several rolling in, which we'll take in just a minute. First, though, I'd like to run through a couple of the preset questions we had for our panelists, and we'll turn over to the audience questions. But Farhad, perhaps starting with you, could you tell us a bit more about how the Massachusetts Capital Equipment Grant Program and the state's MassBridge Workforce Education Planning effort dovetail and complement one another? And perhaps you could also tell us about the role the state of Massachusetts plays in the 5 advanced manufacturing institutes with which it has links to.
Sure, Stu. I think we in a very sort of looking at it holistically, we've been looking at M2I2 is a program that we have been in support of the Manufacturing Institute. And as I talked about, those are the 4 institutes we support. These are capital grants, so there's enabling companies, SMEs, and smaller startups, which are probably a little beyond in a 4 to 7 TRL level, 4 to 7. We gave them opportunity to get a piece of machinery capital that they can then propel themselves in manufacturing. Now, what M2I2 is doing is really aligned with Manufacturing Institute. These jobs tend to be more specialized and very highly specialized jobs aligned with those institutes, whether they're robotics or integrated photonics. At the other extreme level, we have got a program that is a manufacturing training program that we are working in our 4 regions in Massachusetts. These are focusing on fundamental job training. These are what I call traditional manufacturing jobs, machining, welding, and so on and so forth. What was missing really was that how do we connect the jobs that are at the institute levels that are highly specialized to the folks that are working at the sort of what I call the traditional levels. And this is where the MassBridge came in, where it allows us to connect the two together, and hence the name of the bridge. Really what we want to do is create a pathway model, which is something that Amy talked about as well, that these pathway models for us is very key because it allows a continuum where people can get off and get on this pathway model wherever they want to stop in terms of training. Because what we see is that we can't really provide a single model. We can't, that fits everybody. What we want to do is provide flexibility and the ability to sort of get on this platform and get off at the platform where they need to. And the MassBridge provides that ability for us to do that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Farhad. Yeah. Ira, noting actually that we have several congressional staffers currently watching this program today, perhaps you could just tell us a bit about why the Manufacturing USA Network set of institutes have been so vital to enhancing U.S. manufacturing competitiveness, and maybe give us one or two of the best success story examples that you've had from the ARM Institute.
Sure. Well, thanks very much. And Michael had mentioned the institutes. Farhad's working with a number of the institutes, and they really are an extremely important resource for securing the future of advanced manufacturing in the country, each with focusing on critical areas where we either need to advance or we may have fallen behind. And so as the federal government identifies these gaps, they launch these new institutes. Our institute, the ARM Institute, like the other institutes, has a mission for accelerating not just the development and deployment of innovative technologies, in our case, robotics, but also simultaneously making sure that we're empowering the workforce. And I think this is a really smart and essential element of every institute. It's a simultaneously development of technology and empowering the workforce of tomorrow that allows them to develop the skills to support the technologies. Otherwise, we will not be able to maintain those technologies the institutes support. But one of the critical things also about them is that, and again, in our case, we focus on robotics and artificial intelligence and autonomy, but it is driving the interests of manufacturers of all sizes, both large and small. So it is a consortium that brings together, in our case, 280 members that represent the biggest, defense contractors, the biggest OEMs, the small and medium-sized companies, and a whole bevy of startups and early-stage companies working together with community colleges, vocational high schools, universities, the government organizations, nonprofit development organizations, and states, all working together to leverage each other to address these key gaps. We focus on sort of a national mission, but of course our projects tend to be implemented locally because that's where we do the work and that's where we implement. And also, because of the pandemic, I believe all the institutes, including the ARM Institute, have pivoted to do work to support locally in terms of the pandemic projects that can battle the pandemic. We, like all the institutes, initiated a whole host of projects, over $5 million of projects in our case, to battle the pandemic, but also to advance our understanding of the supply chain and how to make it more resilient in the face of future challenges of our nation. And so all the institutes have pivoted their mission and added that as a mission to advance the resiliency of our supply chain from what we've learned from the pandemic in the face of a future pandemic. Just some of the examples that we've done, some of the more complicated applications, and sort of typical of the applications. One of the areas that we've really worked on, for example, is aerospace and developing solutions to advance the aerospace industry. It's projected that the aerospace industry is going to be probably a $20 billion industry in the future. And without automation, it's impossible to scale up the kind of complex processes required to build things for the aerospace. Another one I want to mention that's relevant to today's topic is a project called AmpSkills, which is initiated down in Florida as a prototype that we funded, but it's now expanding, that takes folks that are economically challenged, perhaps homeless or recently incarcerated and so on, and develops boot camps and creates them into robotics technicians. And this is in partnership with local industry that has jobs available, that has pitched those jobs as part of the outcome of the process with a very high rate of employment. So those are some of the examples of what we've done in ARB and why the institutes are so critical.
Thank you so much, Ira. Fantastic. Amy and Michael, let me go a bit off script by now transitioning over to the questions we're receiving from the audience. I'll direct a couple to y'all, but consider this open for response and comment by any of our panelists. Michael received a question. Are there special programs to attract people looking for a career change, including those leaving military service, which might dovetail with another question we discussed, which is that various studies have identified the need for as many as 2 million new highly skilled manufacturing workers in coming years, and how we can manage that between a national need with the local and regional imperative to produce the talent.
Thank you, Stephen. That's a great question. We actually have a number of programs. I think this is an area that really deserves a lot more investment, especially in the disruption of COVID-19. But we've had lots of economic disruption before that as well, and we have a large underserved workforce that's looking for a career change or a new career in a growth industry. So one of our programs out of the LIFT Institute, it's called Operation Next. This is a blended learning program, and I think it's emblematic of the programs that the institutes are developing. And again, kind of doing this at a pilot scale on a local basis and then scaling up from there. And this is for separating service members, although it's now being expanded, for them in their last 6 months to do an online learning program that's rich and includes simulations. And then at the end of that, well, there's actually also a competency-based assessment there to take advantage of things that they've learned in the service that can then be applied to industry. And then at the end of that, there's a hands-on component, right? So that's the blended learning model, where and at the end of that hands-on component, they receive a credential that's valuable in industry and portable across states. The rate has been amazing of hiring coming out of this program. It was piloted at Fort Campbell, and now it's being expanded to, I believe, 9 additional installations across the country. It's being expanded to include military spouses, the National Guard, and there's another expansion with CARES Act funding to expand this beyond military service members. So this is the type of innovative model that the institutes are developing, and really it's across the board in K-12 education, post-secondary, advanced technical education, taking advantage of disruptive technologies, new learning tools, and creating these new pathways, piloting them at a small scale, and then expanding them from there by working with local partners. And I think to Ira and Farhad's point previously, there's a role to play at the local level and at the national level, right? We're at the national and the federal level, we don't have that connectivity and that insight into the specific needs on, a regional initiative would have. But what we can do is develop these new models, these new tools that enhance the toolkit for those local initiatives to be successful. So in addition to that national mission of developing those tools, as Ira mentioned, the institutes are also working locally in industry sectors and around their headquarters, depending on the institute. We've launched a regional leadership initiative that each of our 8 and soon to be 9 institutes are working within a region to convene a coalition of stakeholders, including economic development interests, and recognize that this educational activity has economic impact, and learning providers and industry to lead a localized regional initiative. So the institutes are kind of doing both. Obviously, they can't reach all of these regions, and that's why it's important to develop those tools and develop partnerships with folks like Amy and her network to expand, to bring those tools to new venues, and expand the impact. 1,000 flowers blooming across the country. So a couple different things there, but I hope I addressed the key question there.
That's great. No, perfect. Thank you, Michael. Amy, a question I'll pose 2 questions from the audience initially to you, Amy, and then invite the other panelists to comment further. So first, Amy, if you can comment to the first question, which skills certification programs are the most respected and valued by today's advanced manufacturers? Or you can take the question, what actions can we take to diversify the manufacturing workforce, and how are apprenticeship programs working with those without college degrees from disadvantaged communities?
Thank you. Those are 2 very big questions. I think I'll take the second one and then probably have some of the other panelists chime in on the first one.
Okay.
So in terms of, I guess there's kind of a several parts to that second question, with how we can diversify the manufacturing workforce through apprenticeships. And that is happening in South Carolina slowly. And I think what we see is that manufacturing companies are looking at the company as a whole and determining all the different occupations for which they need to reskill, or they have urgent hiring needs. I think of one company, Nephron Pharmaceuticals. It's a company here in the capital in Columbia that's working with several technical colleges. And they started out with some apprenticeship programs for pharmacy technicians and machine operators and HVAC, but they're also now looking at welders. So within this company, this manufacturing company, they're looking at all the different occupations they need in order to be successful and productive and have the most impact. So I think in terms of diversifying, it's looking at the company as a whole and all the different occupations that are in need. I wanted to also address I think you said individuals who do not have college education. And with the apprenticeship program, the companies would have to decide what types of education skill level they need in order to employ individuals, because it is a full-time job. However, in South Carolina, an initiative that we recently launched, actually just a few months ago, is our pre-apprenticeships. And for those who are new to pre-apprenticeships, they are programs that provide soft skill training and some on-the-job learning in order to help individuals enter registered apprenticeships. And so we do have significant funding to help individuals take some continuing education courses at the technical colleges so they can get some of those basic skills prepared to enter a registered apprenticeship, because the program is very rigorous and does require more than basic math, more than basic reading skills. So pre-apprenticeships is something new that Apprenticeship Carolina is offering, and we are looking at U.S. Department of Labor's high quality framework in order to ensure that the pre-apprenticeship programs meet the standards that are high quality, have the different safety measures, and also recruitment from different underserved communities. The second part to that is Apprenticeship Carolina also has partnerships with many different organizations serving minority communities. And one example is the Urban League. Next week, we'll be signing a partnership agreement with the Urban League of Columbia, Charleston, and Greenville in order to really focus on that pre-apprenticeship to registered apprenticeship pathway, working with all of the Urban League's different stakeholders in South Carolina. So that's just one really big example of how we are focusing on recruitment and outreach to underserved communities and making more opportunities available for employers.
Excellent. Thank you, Amy.
So, Stephen, let me comment on your certification question. I think that was first part of the answer to your question that you, sorry. It's a very, very interesting question. And I think we have sort of engaged a lot of the employers understanding what certification they need, because I think the least what we want to do is basically prepare the workforce for the kind of jobs and the training and the certification they need. But we consistently we see that is pretty very diverse set of requirements. What we've actually gone back and sort of part of the mass bridge we're doing is that we're doing a study trying to find a benchmark and recognition from employers as to what certification are useful and what certification should focus people coming into the workforce should have. But that's something that we're working on. But at the same time, I think we're looking for what we have heard over and over again is that really one of the certification, perhaps it's not a certification, I don't know whether such a certification exists or not, but system thinking. So how do you, if you have a system thinking and process driven, then you can tackle anything. There's a lot of manufacturing jobs, only for that matter, any other jobs, that as long as you know how to approach it, how to solve the problem, and which we put it down to system thinking and process driven is really key attributes that a lot of the manufacturers look for. And then they decide that it's really, they will do the training themselves. They will do the training in particular for that. If we can get the fundamentals of obviously manufacturing in the system thinking and process driven approach over the line, basically.
Yeah, I think that's really a key attribute, Farhad, that you've identified there. And I mean, when it comes to these certifications, there are many of them out there. They are not all valued by industry, and their currency will ebb and flow. And I think it's probably useful to talk about the key attributes. Obviously, a currency within the industry that they're seeking employment in is the most important thing. So I think from our perspective, it really starts with the interests of the employers. And that's where the ARM endorsement program is I think really going to be impactful in identifying those credentials that have value to employers, that are going to lead to employment, that are going to lead to employees who have the skills to be useful on day one, productive on day one. There's another attribute that I think is extremely important, especially for scalability and sustainment. But from the perspective of a student or somebody entering a training program, portability across state lines is really important. A credentialing game is a challenging one, but I think those are two really important attributes. And I think the institutes are positioned in such a way to help enhance that and help curate the credentials that are out there for employers and for students to understand which ones really have value.
Great, thank you very much, Michael. A question from Dana Marshall. What are best practices in ensuring that training is most relevant to actual manufacturing industry needs and job opportunities? Are there ways it can be improved?
So I would take that back to the answer. The first question here is the starting from employers' needs in developing the training programs. And I mean, I think the skills gap makes it self-evident that our education and training system is not meeting the needs of employers currently. That are the biggest credentials in high school degrees and post-secondary degrees and college degrees are not well aligned to the needs of industry. And especially when it comes to these emerging technologies where you have new competencies needed and perhaps more impactfully, new combinations of competencies. For instance, in robotics, even at the technician level, you need both software, electrical and mechanical engineering skills to be useful, in using this new technology. And so that's a hybridization across traditional disciplines that is challenging for our existing educational institutions to adopt. And so we're seeing a lot of innovation in the non-traditional learning space. We're now starting to apply that, back to the traditional learning. I really see a lot of disruptive innovation forces in this space. Obviously, it's a very different market from sort of a free market space where you've got a lot of institutional providers with state funding and backing and a lot of capacity there that cannot be overlooked. And that's why we're trying to take these innovations that are pioneered primarily in that non-traditional learning space and apply them back through programs like MassBridge to traditional learning institutions. And we're actually there's a kind of a third layer. We talked a little bit about the regional implementation and the national and institute driven tools development and a lot of those other elements. But at the federal level, I think it's really important to highlight that it's not just the Department of Defense who's engaging with this. We've heard about grants from the Department of Labor, but obviously the Department of Education, Department of Commerce, and the National Science Foundation and several other federal agencies have a strong role to play here. Department of Energy, and we at DoD Mantech, OSD Mantech, are working. We've developed a strategic framework to work with the institutes and other partners, with states and other state and local engagements through the MEPs, the American Manufacturing Communities Collaborative, and others. We have a framework that I think puts a lot of these ideas that we've been talking about into play with leadership at the federal level, not just by the Department of Defense, but by all these other agencies. And we've already started socializing this and received a lot of input in crafting it, and really see a ton of potential in the models that we've been talking about today to impact our workforce. And to the point that Amy very well addressed in the lens of work and learn programs is really important, especially for enhancing economic mobility, reaching underrepresented groups. We see this as a key strategic priority, and it's a new area of focus to expand the talent pool, because we do not have adequate representation of all of these groups. We're not serving all of these groups well, and there's a ton of opportunity in this emerging and growing advanced manufacturing space, where there's a whole set of new collar jobs that these technologies enable that don't require a four-year degree, require some amount of post-secondary education, but that's a lot more economically viable for many of these underserved and economically disadvantaged populations, especially with things like work-based learning programs.
Dana, another thing to note would be the great work that the Olin College of Engineering does, where it's all hands-on project-based learning with companies. So I think the project engagement is so important. But go ahead, Ira.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just building a couple things on Michael said. One, just on a recent comment, is that in this AMS system, in this endorsement program, in a future phase, what we hope to be doing is finding a way to endorse and measure and endorse and certify the skills of people who do not have a degree, but have knowledge and skills, but don't have a traditional 2 or 4 year degree, in order to provide them with that kind of badge that says that they have these competencies. I just want to pull out one thing from what Farah had said about system engineering and Michael had said about some of the other elements. There's an extraordinary growth in the knowledge required in an advanced manufacturing environment, and that shouldn't be understated. And so if there's any advantage of this whole pandemic situation, it's accelerated our ability to do virtual training, because the amount of information that a worker in advanced manufacturing needs is dramatically different. And just as a colorful example, when I started in manufacturing, the operators in our line would take boxes of product, they would load it into a machine, and they would stand back and then wait for it to come out. And the technicians would grab their wrenches and go to the back of a tool if it broke and fix it. And the engineers would do process things. And if you go into an advanced manufacturing factory today, the operators are staring at a screen full of information and data. And the technicians don't grab wrenches anymore and go in the back of equipment. They're doing data analytics and they're doing statistics. And engineers have become basically masters at big data analysis. So Michael touched on some of these skills Farhad did. These are analytical and mathematical and artificial reality and virtual reality. And that's even at the technician level. So the challenge of certification programs, the challenge of education programs, is to keep up with this ever advancing technology that's driving the advanced manufacturing facilities that we currently see and in the future.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Shira. Two questions all combined. One, how was sustainability and circular economy included in developing new skills and manufacturing opportunities? A related question, what climate-focused manufacturing workforce strategies are states developing to support the transition to a post-carbon economy?
I can take that, and I won't be able to speak in detail, but the Department of Energy has made investments in 5 advanced manufacturing innovation institutes. One of them is Remade, which is focused on the circular supply chain, and so I think that these go hand in hand. There's a great drive of efficiency in adopting these technologies, which help enhance the sustainability, the environmental sustainability of the manufacturing activity. But I think there's another aspect of sustainability that's worth just mentioning, which is the sustainability and currency, as to Ira's previous point, of the skills in this space, and that's continuous learning. And our legacy education system is really set up. You get a 4-year degree to support a 4-year career, but these new educational pathways and these new systems really need to support continuous learning. And maybe you get a 2-year degree and that sets you up for the next few years, but you need to keep your skills current. And the amount of time during your working hours that's spent keeping up to date and doing educational activities is just going to grow and grow and grow, both at the engineering and scientist and at the technician level. And we need to develop education systems and capabilities that meet that challenge, that are much more flexible.
I wanted to chime in as well and just talk a little bit about, I talked a lot about Apprenticeship Carolina, but the South Carolina Technical College system also looks at sustainability with other training programs that are very heavily focused on the manufacturing industry. One is the E-Zone program, which supports incumbent worker training and new technologies, just with manufacturing companies, and then Ready SC, which helps companies with startup. So from the technical college system level, there's different areas of sustainability with the needs that companies have, from startup to reskilling. And then the long-term sustainability with apprenticeships is that incumbent workers can always go through an apprenticeship, no matter what the new technology is, what skills are needed, or different areas that they need to catch up on. And a lot of our apprenticeships are in fact for incumbent workers. And so I think looking at the apprenticeship system in South Carolina and the supports that we provide one-on-one to companies, we can meet them where their needs are and also refer them to other programs in the state that might offer additional funding and even equipment, cover equipment costs.
Yeah, Stephen, I think one other thing that I may comment on is, there's a short comment on that, is that through their M2I2 program that we have, we give out innovation grants to companies and also make available CapEx spending. What we do see with a lot of folks talking about is that, how do I decrease my footprint for reasons to be economically more viable, at the same time do the greater good for the world, if you will. And what we see is that these CapEx spendings are being aimed at revitalizing or renewing machineries that otherwise were sort of power hog. Now there are innovations taking place at these machines that they can be more competitive from a perspective of being more business competitive, as well as creating energy saving that they're looking for.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that I want to just put stomp the tie between economic sustainability and environmental sustainability, that these intelligent and automation technologies and these data systems, things like predictive maintenance and the data system to make your factories smarter, makes it more efficient, more profitable, and more environmentally sustainable and more material efficient. Efficiency wins across the board.
Great. And maybe a final question for our panel. From the audience, I'll combine two. Thoughts on curriculum development, both at community colleges and research universities, also AP courses in robotics, data science, and manufacturing, kind of thoughts on how we broadly develop sets of curriculum. And related question, how can we use information technology to empower students and workers to make more informed decisions about their training opportunities?
That's a really good question. I'd like to just mention the NSF, Advanced Technological Education Program. I think that a lot of the work to be done here in upskilling the skilled technical workforce is going to happen at community colleges, in post-secondary institutions that aren't giving only four-year degrees. And there's a gap there, and there's a need to help these institutions to develop and incorporate these advanced manufacturing technologies. It's not something that they're as well positioned to do as the four-year degree programs. So I think there's a role there for the institutes, for the ATE program, for programs at the federal level and investments to help enhance that. But that's where I think a lot of the training is going to need to take place.
Yeah,
Ira, the Brookings did a study last year, digitalization in the American workforce, where they found that whereas just 53% of US manufacturing jobs required a medium to high digital skill level in 2002, 82% do today. I know this is something you directly work on. What needs to be done broadly to enhance the digital skill set of America's workforce?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's sort of a glib answer to say, well, we need more of the current training that we have developed particularly at our community colleges and vocational high schools, and also what's very important is stackable degree programs into our colleges and universities between the community colleges, and that's something I know that Farhad and colleagues in Massachusetts are really reinforcing. But I think one of the important message there is the connectivity between a lot of these institutions, as well as virtual training, in order to be able to produce workers at all different levels. So there's a high need for technicians. We need more technicians, and one of the things is that there's sort of a chicken and an egg. We know that there's a lot of seats prior to the pandemic in advanced manufacturing programs that were high caliber that were going unfilled. So we also need a marketing effort in order to make sure that we're filling the seats of those high caliber programs for advanced manufacturing degrees. We need more stackable credentials at the community college level so that they can become a bachelor degree at some point if they so decide, so that we're not continually funding folks into a bachelor's degree when they would be very happy and very much needed with the technician level degree and so on. But part of it is increasing the marketing of advanced manufacturing jobs nationally. So, and that helps the states to fill those seats that sometimes are going empty in advanced manufacturing programs. And in robotics and automation, one of the advantages we have, and Michael hit it right on the head, is there's a lot of training out there. And that's why our institute, opposed to the other institutes, actually have to create, biophysical training and integrated photonics training and so on. There is lots of career training out there in robotics and autonomy and so on. It's a matter of making sure that we advance the culture about advanced manufacturing so people go into those careers, and we communicate to people where that training is, what type of training it is exactly, what they get out of it, and what the quality is. And that's why at the Arm Institute, we've kind of pivoted from thinking about creating curriculum. It's really out there in a great degree, and our members are creating it to helping workers, helping employers find that training, evaluate its capability, what they're getting out of it, and kind of standardize our understanding of it.
Yeah, that marketing message, just a quick final point. I think it's really about awareness, because this technology is amazing. These opportunities in this space are amazing, both for the skilled technical workforce and the engineers and scientists with 4-year degrees. And programs that have that connectivity, both at the K-12 level and all the way through incumbent worker training, just show what's available, what's possible here, what the applications of these digital skills look like, what advanced manufacturing is in our current day, things like pre-apprenticeship, things like the Flex Factor program, where you just create that little bit of connectivity and awareness of what this really is, and it speaks for itself.
Excellent. Michael, Amy, Farhad, any last words from you?
Yeah, so I've worked both at the federal, local, and state level in workforce development. And one of the things I could say, it's really about partnerships, not just talking about the marketing, but aligning curriculum with what employer needs are, because many times all of these elements exist, but they're all in silos. So I think that the most important thing at both at the federal level and at the local level is looking at the partnerships that are already out there and looking at what companies are doing and tying them to different programs such as Project Lead the Way, AP. These courses are already being taught, but maybe they're not aligned to apprenticeship programs. So this is something that in South Carolina is very important to us, especially with marketing, working with the Manufacturers Alliance, always participating in the manufacturing conference every year. All of these different organizations exist, but maybe they're just not connected. So partnerships are very key at every level.
Couldn't agree more.
Great. Well, fantastic. Well, why don't we wrap it up there? I want to say thank you to Amy, Ira, Farhad, and Michael for your excellent comments and remarks. Really appreciate you joining us today and sharing these perspectives on state level manufacturing workforce development strategies. Okay, with that, let me now introduce Sue Helper, who will lead our second panel of the day here focused on supply chains. Susan Helper is the Frank Tracy Carlton Professor of Economics at the Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western Reserve University. She was formerly Chief Economist at the U.S. Department of Commerce and a member of the White House staff. She served as chair of the Economics Department and has been a visiting scholar at the University of Oxford, the University of California, Berkeley, Harvard, and MIT. Her research focuses on the globalization of supply chains and how to revitalize U.S. manufacturing. She received her PhD in economics from Harvard and holds a BA from Oberlin College in economics, government, and Spanish. So Sue, as I turn the conversation now over to you, I will let you introduce your panelists, and I will just note that today's event will be posted online as well as on YouTube, and it's accessible from this event page. It'll be up within 24 hours of the end of today's event. With that, Sue, thank you. The floor is yours.
Great. Well, thanks a lot. I'm really pleased to introduce this panel. And I just wanted to say a word. I think it's really great that ITAF has been a leader in kind of thinking about supply chains. Just to talk a little bit about what this means and why it's important. Um, Firms have restructured their supply chains in significant ways in recent decades. Large firms have shifted from doing many activities in-house to buying goods and services from a complex web of other companies. And the way these supply chains are structured has large implications for whether the firms within them can actually do the kinds of things that we heard about in the previous panel. So provide the capabilities needed for innovation, the ability to provide workers with good jobs and stable career paths. And often small firms find themselves squeezed and unable to make these changes. Um, and and in some cases we see lead firms at the top providing these leadership and resources. In a few cases we see governments and associations helping firms upgrade. But I think it's fair to say that government policy at national, state, and local levels has been slow to recognize these changes, supply chains. And so I'm really pleased today to introduce this panel of people that are leading and thinking and doing about innovative ways to create these innovative and sustainable supply chains. The first person I'm very pleased to introduce is Phil Singerman, who's been a mentor of mine actually in recent years, who recently stepped down as the Associate Director for Innovation and Industry Services at NIST. And he was responsible for overseeing, among other things, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, the Small Business Innovation Research Awards, etc. He was the former director of the Economic Development Administration, participated in scores of local, state, and national advisory boards and associations. And I won't go on to take his time with more of his bio. And similarly, everybody else has very long and distinguished bios that I mostly will refer you to the ITIF website to see. But Phil, please talk to us for 7 or 8 minutes about your thoughts on this.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Sue?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you for that introduction. Thank you for Stephen and ITIF and Bill Bonvillian and all the others who organized this panel. The COVID crisis of 2020 vividly demonstrates the consequences of 4 decades of the decline of US manufacturing. A combination of tax policies that favor financial services, trade policies that lead to deficits, corporate policy that drives outsourcing, technology policy that underinvests in advanced manufacturing, and talent policy that undervalues STEM education has led to a lack of resilience, surge capacity, and redundancy in our supply base. These trends have undermined our productive capacity, imperiled our defense industrial base, and caused millions of people to lose their jobs. Now hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives. The dramatic impact of the COVID-19 crisis and the unprecedented national public and private response it evoked provides an opportunity for a fundamental rethinking of the strategy to restore our productive capabilities. There are 3 major takeaways. First, in the US federal system, states play a necessary and critical role in policy development, program implementation, and political sustainability. Governors have clearly demonstrated the leadership role of the states in facing the COVID crisis. This is nothing new. Over the decades, states have demonstrated their essential role administering federally funded programs, such as the interstate highway system, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, workforce training, and K-12 education. States are a necessary component of a robust federal system, but are not sufficient. You need national leadership. Existing federal agencies do have the authority and flexibility to respond to unexpected challenges if they are led by experienced administrators, have adequate resources, value professional expertise, and have political support. Third, large corporations by themselves have generally not been able to quickly pivot to repurpose their facilities, retrain their workforces, or reprogram their robots to respond to the immediate needs for crucial medical supplies. The decline of vertically integrated industrial systems through the Wall Street-driven asset-light and shareholder value strategies has created a highly efficient, just-in-time global supply chain, which unfortunately lacks redundancy, resilience, and is blind to single-source dependencies in its lower tiers. Yesterday, as Stephen mentioned in the first panel, Rob Atkinson issued a brief white paper, Time for a Federal State National Economic Development Partnership. This is precisely what is needed to restore our domestic supply chains, and it builds upon Stephen Ezel's longer paper from the spring, Policy Recommendations to Stimulate U.S. Manufacturing Innovation. On this panel, you will hear about leading examples of state and regional efforts to address supply chain issues. It is important to remember that small manufacturing firms are the base of our domestic supply chain. There are nearly 300,000 manufacturing establishments, 99% with fewer than 500 employees, and the majority of these firms have fewer than 50 employees, but they employ approximately half of all manufacturing workers. Managed by nonprofit organizations, academic institutions, and state governments, but funded by federal agencies, these programs primarily work on the supply side, that is, helping small firms become more productive and competitive. They are effective and efficient, but suboptimally federally funded and often bureaucratically constrained by their sponsoring agencies. There are other good programs that operate in this space too. EDA's Regional Innovation Strategies and OEA's Defense Manufacturing Community Partnerships Program provide support to community infrastructure. But affecting the demand for domestic suppliers is more challenging. President-elect Biden's Build Back Better, Buy America provisions are a good start, but need to be strictly enforced through a rigorous waiver process coupled with robust supplier scouting. This approach was proven by the ARA response led by MEP to the first Great Recession in those sectors such as transportation, where federal agencies had a direct role. Its efficacy was demonstrated again by the large number of local, grassroots, state, and regional efforts to identify suppliers of personal protective equipment during the Great Pandemic. However, the relationship between private sector OEMs and their suppliers is more difficult to affect because it reflects a classic market failure. There is no incentive for OEMs to invest in long-term relationships with their suppliers. Toyota is an exception because they cannot appropriate the full value of such investments. The result is that private purchasing decisions are transactional, and purchasing offices are generally evaluated on the basis of cost saving, not long-term effective relationships. Sue Helper and colleagues such as John Gray at Ohio State have examined this challenge in detail. Harry Mosher of the Reshoring Initiative has analyzed total cost of ownership in an attempt to persuade private firms that utilizing domestic suppliers and reshoring them in particular is financially beneficial when all risk factors are taken into account. Although the private sector disincentives to invest in domestic suppliers cannot be rebalanced by state and regional programs alone, it's primarily a federal responsibility, utilizing all the tools of the federal agencies and federal government, including monetary policy. States and localities can adopt some programs to influence private sector purchasing decisions. And I'll leave that discussion of those of such initiatives to the Q&A session. It's now my pleasure to turn the mic over to my friend and colleague, Matt Watson, Senior Vice President, Empire State Development, Division of Science, Technology, and Innovation, NYSTAR. Matt, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Phil. It's always good to see you. It's a pleasure to see you again. It's been a while. And thank you, ITF, as well. Good morning, everybody that's listening. So I apologize, I got to give a little overview of what I do in the division to give you context before I get into our actual supply chain efforts. So it might be a little long-winded in the beginning, but hopefully it will tie in and you'll get a better sense of who we are, what we do. So I work at Empire State Development. It's New York State's economic development agency. I run the Division of Science, Technology, Innovation, which supports the innovation economy in New York through a variety of programs. We manage about $55 million a year in state and federal funding. And with that, we fund over 70 centers across the state. That includes 29 university research centers made up of the Center for Advanced Technology program and Centers of Excellence program. Between those two, we have 15 CATs and 14 Centers of Excellence. And they cover a wide range of emerging technology, key technology areas that are vital to New York State's economy. We have, through those programs, we touch on a variety of technology focus areas such as biotechnology, advanced materials, advanced manufacturing, microelectronics, clean tech, sensors, and a number of others as well. We also manage the New York MEP program. We are the designated New York MEP Center. And through that program, we get a significant amount of funding from the federal government. We add funding from state government, and we leverage that to fund over 11 centers across the state to provide services to small, medium-sized manufacturers. So we have one center for each of our 10 economic development regions. And we also have a statewide center that we work very closely with in identifying capabilities across the state, making referrals, and marketing various programs that are available. Also in our portfolio, we have 30 high technology incubators and hotspots that are really focused on accelerating the technology coming out of our universities or really anywhere in the state. We also have a Science and Tech Law Center that looks at patent law. We'll take a look at competitive landscapes and various other things to help early stage companies that couldn't afford working with a lawyer. So these are just a few of the key activities and initiatives that we fund. We also work very closely with Manufacturing USA Institutes. We're fortunate to have 3 headquartered in New York State. We have AIM Photonics, we have Remade, and we also have Rapid, which focus on chemical. I don't know, that one is out of New York City. The other 2 are out of Rochester area. We also have made direct investments into 5 Manufacturing USA Institutes. So we're heavily invested. We were there in the very beginning supporting these initiatives, and we continue to support them by dedicating staff to work with these institutes to accelerate technology that may be coming out of the institutes, or making sure that our companies are aware of their capabilities of getting the companies to these institutes and get the help they desperately need. I think everybody has seen how the weakness of our supply chain has been affected by the pandemic. And it really demonstrated the need for strengthening it and localizing supply chains. So we've taken a hard look at the difficulties, try to figure out the best initiatives and efforts that we can roll out to intervene in addressing short-term supply shortages while making in the long term, making supply chains more resilient. This presents a tremendous historic opportunity for us really to bring manufacturing back to the States and also to strengthen our manufacturing backbone in the country. So with all these, what I mentioned earlier, with all these assets and partnerships that we have going, we have tremendous capabilities. And what we're looking for is we're looking at leveraging these capabilities to address supply chain issues. So there's 4 key efforts that we're partaking in to really make a difference. One of those is material substitution. We're trying to take a look at the supply chain issues that companies were having in identifying or getting materials from other parts of the country or world. We're trying to figure out, are there alternative materials that can be used to replace those shortages? So we're working with Clarkson University's Center for Advanced Materials Processing, Alfred University's Center for Advanced Ceramics Technology, Cornell University's Materials Research, Rochester Institute of Technology, NYU, and a host of other our partners. We're also trying to look at reshoring the supply chain localization. We have actually, we're fortunate enough to get another grant from NIST MEP, where we are in the process of doing a survey of companies, figuring out where their supply chain weaknesses are, and trying to figure out where we can intervene and assist. Some of the early work that we're doing with that so far is matching some of these companies with contract manufacturers to get the production back to the States. But Phil mentioned earlier, Harry Moser, we're actually working with him as well to take a look at the total cost of ownership and demonstrate to these companies that it's beneficial financially to move some of this production or all of the production back as well. We're also looking at startups and technology acceleration to help the needs. Is there technology out there that can be used to change a product or can be used to replace materials in a product to really address the shortages that we've seen? And product redesign. We have a lot of capabilities in product redesign. Where can we redesign the product so it's using less of the materials or using different components that can be done or located in the US to really shore up the supply chain and strengthen the supply chain. So I look forward to really hearing from the other panelists on what they're doing. Would love feedback if anybody's much more deeper into some of these initiatives than we are currently, and look forward to really hearing from the audience as well and some other ideas that may be able to help us move along. So thank you, everybody. And I think up next is Phil Mintz out of North Carolina.
Thanks, Matt. Good to see all of you, and thank you for having me on the panel. We in North Carolina, we organized our manufacturing extension partnership just around a coalition of many of our state-supported programs and also some nonprofits as well. So we try to approach our smaller to mid-sized manufacturers with solutions in a comprehensive way. I mean, whether it's from our partners here at NC State University, who's their long-term industrial extension program helps companies with efficiencies and product developments, to our cooperation with the North Carolina Community College System and their customized training program, and also with our partners at Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina, which help us with export training programs as well as retention strategies. And those are just to name a few. We have a few labs that are part of our program that focus on development of polymers and also development of textile fabrics, such as the Manufacturing Solutions Center. So we have established kind of a cohesive program that have the resources in place to support many of the different needs that we may discover as our agents get in the field throughout the partnership. Like most of our other states, we've learned a lot about our manufacturers and their ability to adjust during this pandemic. We operate, of course, from the deep textile belt, and we've committed a lot of resources toward the increased PPE demands and the limited supply because, related to fabrics mostly, whether it's medical or non-medical. But many of our other diversified industries are reaching out to us as well because of their challenges with the long supply chains and their critical components. So we've learned that there's a lot of will in our state to operate with less dependence on the imported parts, but the pivoting has also exposed the challenges that we are all just speaking about. So for example, we've got phone calls later on into the pandemic because there was this great awakening, when some of our companies really responded to the challenges of making many protective garments and masks, only to see them stuck in their inventory months later whenever our cheaper imports became available again. So we know that is a challenge, and that is discouraging to some of our smaller manufacturers who really have stepped up to the challenge. At the same time, we're starting to work with companies on strategies for investing in, product redesigns that allow for a reduced need for imported parts. So, one of to sum it up a little bit, we're engaging small manufacturers all the time with the dialogue that really helps them work through the changing landscape, where we know that the ability to meet a new demand, such as PPE, or other specialized or high volume OEMs such as automotive and aerospace, it's going to require serious consideration for modern manufacturing techniques and technology. But to piggyback on some of the things that Ira spoke about from ARM, I mean, the messaging has to be right, because when we speak of automation, it's not an either or. We need both the jobs and the technology to be successful. And so that is one of the important things that we're doing. We're really embracing the advanced manufacturing technologies and the workers that go along with it, including additive manufacturing, of course, automation and robotics. And so we are making a big effort to help companies understand that along with the technology, we really have to focus on our local vendor development, ensuring that all of our suppliers in the state, engage in our modern efficiencies and qualities and all of those things that are needed to be successful. It's going to be trouble if we're not able to get our efficiencies in place where we can drive our costs down to be able to compete with these imports. Because just because we want to reshore it doesn't mean that it's going to work out easily. And so we're embracing and we're supportive of the national commitment. Some of the guaranteed contracting that we need at the national level to help our companies get started. And so we're excited about some of the things we're seeing at the national level, and we're glad to participate. I mean, our job as the NCMEP is just to encourage our manufacturers to participate and make their investment in these technologies and what's needed to be able to participate in the new supply chains. And so it's great to see and hear the efforts in workforce that was discussed in the other panel. But we're happy to be a part of the ongoing activities around reshoring and encouraging our smaller manufacturers to really stay in the game and continue to grow as the demand advances. And I'm looking forward to talking more about this.
Great. Next up, we have Kevin Carr, who's the CEO of Florida Makes. Kevin was actually the first director of the Manufacturing Extension Partnership and has recently decided to take his talents to Florida. So really looking forward to hearing about the great things that you've done, both nationally and locally.
Thank you all, and thank you, Susan. ITIF, Bill, and David. I was the former director of the MEP at NIST. I was in the middle of a consulting job in Florida, and somehow I wound up managing an MEP center in Florida 5 years later now. So give you a little background on operating an MEP in Florida. When people think of Florida, the last thing they think of is manufacturing. It's usually beaches, it's usually Mickey Mouse, it's tourism. Our economy is driven very heavily by that. And despite that, we actually have a fairly large, in terms of number of establishments, footprints, manufacturers in the state. There's over 20,700 establishments throughout Florida involved in manufacturing. So it's a significant part of our employment. It's a significant part of our economy, but in terms of policy and policy direction, it kind of gets passed over, I should say, as we rely very heavily on, again, the tourism economy. When I came down here 5 years ago to reestablish, actually as a consultant, the center here in Florida, I was amazed at the amount of assets that the state had, yet discouraged by the fact that they didn't really talk to each other, and that may not be unique to Florida. So I was thinking, MEP would become part of a manufacturing ecosystem, but in point of fact, we had to come down here and actually try to create that manufacturing ecosystem and bring those assets, those educators, those consultants, those community colleges, best as possible, research institutions, into a room and begin to organize sort of a strategy going forward. Like David had said earlier, is there manufacturing economic development policy in the state? Yes, largely focused, as Phil said, on attraction, and also in some cases, in some instances on programs directed at export assistance. So our challenge when we restarted an MEP center here 5 years ago was sort of the uphill battle of putting manufacturing and the manufacturing economy of the state onto the radar screen of a lot of our policymakers and administrators within the state and at the local level. From the word go, you could look at Florida and we could see that it had below average productivity as compared with other states, which begged the question, what is it that we're building? Why is it that our products are much lower value when we have places like SpaceX here and Blue Origin here and NASA here and very large defense presence here? And the conclusion I came to was that we weren't participating in our own supply chains, much less larger supply chains across the country. And I know a colleague of mine at Space Florida, when I first said that on a stage, there were a lot of wincing, but he stood up and said, that's exactly correct. A lot of these companies that have come to the state have drugged their supply chains. We're lucky if they're US-based supply chains, but in many cases, they're coming from foreign sources. So while we have this large footprint of 20,700 manufacturing firms, our contribution to the supply chain was very little. So very early, we began to focus on what is it that we can do that could increase the value contribution of our suppliers in our own supply chains. So supplier development initiative wasn't necessarily driven by the pandemic. The other thing that kind of drove us having a focus in this area was supply chain disruptions. And even before you get to the pandemic, you're all probably aware that every September we have a series of hurricanes. And those hurricanes, in some cases, can wipe out a city, wipe out a company in the stroke of a pen, and all of a sudden we've got a supply chain problem. And our ability to pivot when things like that occur, you could see was very weak. And then last but certainly not least is the pandemic. And I don't think I need to tell anybody on this phone call the pandemic story, but there we were in the middle of this, probably just like Phil experienced and the folks at New York experienced, trying to really using SneakerNet, connect companies, suppliers, customers with different producers and material suppliers to really cover the gap of that disruption that we were experiencing in our supply chains. That was a very hectic couple months there for all of our staff and people throughout the state trying to offset some of the losses they were experiencing. I think since the beginning of time at NIST back in 1988 and 89 when MEP first started, we've been talking about this ability to get our arms around the suppliers. That, if we could only have a supplier capability database, that would be like the holy grail, where we could match people. Because in many cases, the biggest issue is just the awareness that a capability exists. And I've heard stories where, companies down here are searching for suppliers up in Indiana only to find that there was somebody across the industrial park that actually produced exactly what they needed. So a lot of our efforts have been focused actually since Hurricane Irma, which was a couple of years back, on could we build that supplier capability database? And when we began that process, we began focusing a couple of years back on populating a database focused around commercial space, aviation, and aerospace. And since have pivoted that capabilities of that database to incorporate healthcare needs and the healthcare supply chains. We built a system really that was a replication of another system out in Utah called Connix, and we launched what we call now Florida Connix, which is a supplier capabilities database, and it has three basic layers. The first layer focuses on, if you will, almost like a Yellow Pages directory of who these firms are, where they are, what are some of their base capabilities. Second layer is a member layer where the company can go in there and actually put in what kind of equipment they have, what kind of work envelopes they have, what kind of certifications they have. So that if you're looking for a particular company that's maybe ITAR certified or ISO certified, has certain capabilities in terms of machining or materials, you would be able to go into this database and find them. And then there's a third and very important layer, which is a confidential layer, where companies, OEMs, can actually go in and begin to lay out their supply chains as they know them and begin to develop redundancy for those supply chains. Second sources, third sources, fourth sources. And that's, we've had a lot of success with that so far. But again, this is in its infancy. This is something that we're just in the beginning of launching. So that's the system that we have in place. And again, we based that on a system that was in place out in Utah. And one of the reasons we were particularly attracted to that system was it had a connectivity to the manufacturing marketplace at the National Association of Manufacturers. So not only as we went into the pandemic were we able to use a system to be able to find suppliers, we were able to find suppliers that were located in the national database, also located in Utah and other states. So far so good, but that's the system that we've put in place, and we're quite happy with it. One of the biggest challenges that we've seen and we've heard and even the NAM will confess to this reality is it's very hard to put together a system like this. A lot of the firms that belong to the NAM are the large OEMs and first tiers, and they're not necessarily interested in a system like this unless it's populated with suppliers, and vice versa. The suppliers aren't particularly interested in systems like this unless it's populated with business or OEMs. So working through an MEP and populating and putting in place a system like this has been critical to solving that chicken and the egg problem. And I think we've gotten past that now, and we're really beginning to gather some momentum. As Phil or a number of other people have said, most of the manufacturers that we have in this country are very, very small. So it requires the capability to get to those firms and work with those firms. It requires the kind of reach that MEP centers have throughout the country to reach those very, very small companies that are very, very essential to our economic resilience. So I'll end my comments there and pass it over to Bernardo Barata for his comments.
Thanks, Kevin. Bernardino Barata from MXD. Thank you to ITF for giving me the opportunity to be here today and speak about this. I think this is a great topic and really important. A little bit about MXD. We're one of 16 government-backed manufacturing innovation institutes around the nation. You've heard from IRA, ARM, and others today. We're the second oldest institute, and last year we were renewed for a second 5-year term. So every institute has a different focus. Ours is focused on digital manufacturing, and we say as viewed through the digital thread and how it weaves its way through the product development lifecycle. So it touches design, it touches manufacturing, and it touches interactions with the supply chain. Like a lot of the other institutes, we're a membership-driven organization, and our 300+ members reflect our nation's leading manufacturers, universities, and solution providers. We're located on Goose Island in Chicago, and our facility includes a 22,000 square foot future factory, where MXD and its members, we showcase advanced manufacturing concepts in easy to understand ways. But at our heart, we're a non-competitive neutral space. We're a core group of large manufacturers and solution providers. Work closely with universities, small and medium manufacturers, startups, and nonprofits to create innovative solutions to tackle manufacturing's common challenges. To date, we've completed 65 R&D projects representing over $100 million of public-private investment, focused on accelerating the adoption of Industry 4.0 concepts. We're working with our membership to adopt the learnings and outcomes from these projects, and through them, deploy this to the nation's manufacturing supply chain. As the digital thread is all about data, in 2019, MXD was tasked by the Department of Defense to form the National Center for Cybersecurity and Manufacturing, with the mission to secure America's supply chains. We're primarily focused on providing SMMs with the knowledge and appropriate tools to allow them to identify and mitigate their cybersecurity risks. Finally, this morning we talked a lot about workforce, and MXD is no different than a lot of the other institutes. We have a program called MXD Learn, which is a series of initiatives to attract new workers to manufacturing through reskilling, upskilling, and new skilling to ensure that the factories of tomorrow will have the skilled workforce needed to run them effectively. Before we talk about today's topic, Phil shared this piece of background information. I quote this a lot. So of the nation's 240 to 300, depending what you include in manufacturers, really 98% of them have less than 500 employees. But the number I always quote is that 75% or 185,000 direct manufacturers have less than 20 employees. These small manufacturers are the backbone of our domestic manufacturing, but they often lack the resources to adopt the latest and greatest ideas. When we talk about strengthening manufacturing supply chains, we need to consider how to engage these small manufacturers and support them so they can participate in this transformation. I love that the MEPs are on this call because the reality is they are our primary touch to many of these manufacturers, and through them is our best way to engage and support these manufacturers. In my opinion, and it's no different from a lot of things that were shared today, there's three core elements that I think need to be established as we look at increasing domestic supply chain resiliency. Most of these can be done at the local and state level, but we do need to map nationally all of our supply chains, really to understand what exists today, what are our needs today, but then more importantly, map the capabilities and capacities that exist in order to be able to change things. Another piece is we have to increase the ability to generate and ingest digital data among the supply chain. Talk more about that in a second. But by doing this, we can then create opportunities for our SMMs to pivot to meet our nation's needs. There's financial implications, there's technology implications. I'm going to leave the financial because I think Phil covered a lot of them really well. But from a technology implication, during the days of COVID, the initial days, and Kevin talked about this just a few minutes ago, and so did Phil from North Carolina, a lot of initiatives sprung up to try to collect information about providers and consumers, especially for personal protective equipment. MXD was directly and indirectly involved in a lot of these. And most were successful to a point, but unfortunately, a lot of them struggled with making the data actionable. Lots of data was collected, but much of it was unstructured. And where it was structured, there wasn't a common data standard. So it made it really difficult to share data across different regions or at the national level. MXD sought and received CARES Act funding for a project which builds upon multiple past projects and seeks to develop a framework that enables mapping supply chains from the bill of materials back to raw materials and identify all the different pieces of that supply chain. It then uses an artificial intelligence engine to predict risk within that supply chain using public risk factor data as well as some private risk factor data. Finally, it provides the tools to explore alternate supply chains to address the risk. Now that could be finding different suppliers, or it could be redesigning your part to use a different technology or a different process. But the whole thing is, how do we help people to understand what's in their supply chain, identify risk early on, make it a proactive process to mitigate this risk. The outcome of this project is going to be a deployable solution because we're working with off-the-shelf software packages. But to make frameworks like this nationally deployable, we need a common ontology that's used at the local, state, and national levels to catalog our manufacturers and suppliers. Once established, we have to make this data broadly available so that we can create opportunities, as Kevin just said, that someone in Florida can seek out a supplier, not just across the nation, but just down the street that can meet their needs. Once we set up this sharing of information, the next step is how to make it easier to share and consume design files. Industry 4.0 is based on a highly connected digital world where intelligent factories and connected supply chains allow manufacturers to deliver custom creations without sacrificing the benefits of mass production. This is great, but most small manufacturers are just not ready for this. Auburn University led an MXD study of SMMs, which found that many still use fax machines to receive CAD drawings. Others that receive their CAD files digitally, they couldn't convert them to their native software package because the two were incompatible. So they ended up redesigning these, re-entering these designs by hand. You can't have a highly connected system with a huge gap like that in it. Open standards will be key to sharing design files and other data among the supply chain. NIST has led a development of a technical data package standard that leverages portable document formats and also expands what data is available in order to make it easier to exchange design files and other manufacturing data within the supply chain. MXD has funded multiple projects aimed at increasing the adoption of model-based engineering, but the opportunity exists for the MEPs especially and the institutes to work with manufacturers to drive greater adoption. When you're creating these opportunities for manufacturers to pivot, what that really means is you have to have manufacturers be aware of what the needs are in order to have a chance to fill it. During this COVID crisis, we've all seen examples of how manufacturers, small and large, have pivoted to produce products they've never built before, or embrace new technologies in their process. Additive manufacturing went from the prototyping team to the production floor. Overseas suppliers were replaced by local suppliers who converted their production lines to manufacture needed parts. And more interestingly, roadblocks to the adoption of digital manufacturing concepts fell away from the need to meet production demands. By understanding our nation's needs and capabilities, we believe that you can leverage digital technologies to help our domestic manufacturers pivot to address the nation's current and future needs. Thank you for the time, and I really look forward to hearing the conversation, because I think this is a great panel that reflects the people that need to be involved to make this a reality. Thank you.
That's really great. Really, thank you for all these really interesting perspectives. And just to kind of give an overview of where we are, I think we're seeing these really innovative efforts to build an economic development strategy that's very different from the old smokestack chasing or economic attraction facilities. That we actually build a manufacturing ecosystem, as Kevin stated, where there's a lot of value that companies and other institutions create that they don't capture themselves, as Phil mentioned. And so we see, I think, this nascent network of manufacturing extension partnerships that really focus on kind of technology transfer to small manufacturers, the Manufacturing USA Institutes that focus on getting technology out of the lab and into markets. And we're seeing then participation with universities to actually develop the technology in the first place, help with training, et cetera. And so we're seeing some really cool innovative activities there, I think. Where to start? I have a bunch of questions. Maybe I will start with the pandemic, as I think a number of you mentioned. It's kind of an opportunity, but also potentially a danger. So that it showed, as all the panelists stated, I think, some of the weaknesses in our supply chains, and it's an opportunity to rebuild, but there's also a threat. And I think, as both Phil and Matt talked about, is you could build up this capability, and then you can find that either the demand falls or there's cheaper suppliers abroad. And so I guess I want to throw this open, but specifically wanted to ask Matt, you mentioned working with Harry Moser in this total cost of ownership. And the idea that, in fact, if you look at costs correctly and think about the hidden costs involved in importing and using faraway suppliers, American companies actually look better. And I'm wondering if you can talk about some of these hidden costs that make the equation actually look a little better, and you give us some examples.
Well, we are in the early stages of this effort, but some of the you look at transportation costs, you're looking at increased costs in China for labor, you're looking at some tariffs being in place, you're looking at lost opportunities when you can't get the supplies in a timely fashion. So there's a number of issues that are affecting the total cost of ownership. And we actually have a webinar scheduled. I believe it's next week that we can invite people to, if folks want to hear from Harry and what the process is that he's looking at. So that's something we could share with the group.
Great. And just to kind of keep on this reshoring theme, a number of you mentioned product redesign, and I think that's a really important thing, that if you think about, a company is using a supplier abroad, they've probably optimized the component to meet that supplier's capability. If you're going to move it back to the US, you may need something that's less labor intensive or takes advantage of materials available in the region. I think this is a maybe undersold capability, and I'm wondering if a couple people want to talk about how that works in your states.
I know we have engaged a couple of companies who came to us directly and just talked about, we want to reshore and we don't want to have to be dependent on overseas manufacturing. Can you help us with looking at our process and products and whether or not we can do something different? And so that, involved us in working in a broader way with some designers that are kind of outside their companies and kind of helping them kind of engage with them and speak to that. Some of the smaller companies we've learned over time are not so great at designing things. I mean, they have a lot of ideas, but they're mostly suppliers to larger companies. And so, as they think about their supply chain and what they need to do, they still need some encouragement as well as support in terms of how do I approach this? Who can help me do this? And so that's one of the ways we've been able to help our smaller manufacturers in our state, is to help them get together and involve some of the designers who can help them look at what they have and see how they can redesign it and make it easier for them to make it all themselves.
Susan, if I could add to that. So we're fortunate to have the Remade Institute in New York State. Remade is all about trying to figure out how to reduce waste. So can you design a product or the process, manufacturing process, so you're using less material? But it's also about, can we redesign the product so that it can be recycled or reused, or can you pull parts from it to be reused? So that's a big expertise, a tremendous expertise that we have available in the state. Also, they're located right next to RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, who also have our Advanced Manufacturing Center of Excellence. That is a tremendous asset that does similar work to that. And they go also looking at how do we design a product to continue to make it easier to produce, to use less of the critically shortage supplies and things of that nature. So we rely heavily on our university partners and nonprofits that we work with to help with those efforts.
Hey, Sue, building on that, Autodesk is a member of MXD and they have generative design capabilities. And Phil kind of hit a great point. Small manufacturers can build things, but they're not necessarily the best at design. So Autodesk actually would go in and work with these small manufacturers to use generative design concepts to simplify their designs. And so they took 9 parts and converted into a single part. Just the savings and assembly costs actually allowed them to produce that part locally in the US instead of producing it overseas and then producing the parts in the US, shipping them overseas for assembly, and then shipping the sub-assembly back to the US for final insertion, which was their cost-effective way of doing it before. So when you kind of change how you think about the problem, sometimes you come up with solutions that can really change the cost model.
That's really interesting. I guess I had just one more question about just following up on the really interesting menu of things you presented, and then maybe bring some things together. Several of you talked about supply chain databases. And I think this is one of these things that first seems really easy. Like, well, of course, if I need somebody, they have an incentive to make themselves available. But then when you think about it, it becomes very difficult. And there's I guess a question about what kind of information do you need? Can you really do this online, or do you actually need to go and kick the tires? Is this really a useful thing that governments can provide, or is this just something the private's better left to the private sector? So I guess I'm interested in hearing a little bit more detail, maybe a case of a matching that occurred. Oh, on the one hand, a second is kind of, how much money are we talking about to build one of these things? And I think Kevin talked in particular about the kind of chicken and egg nature of this. There's a really, network externalities here. The more firms that are in the database, both as suppliers and demanders, the more it's worth to everyone. Should we have a national database? What would it take to build one, etc. So I guess I'm asking both a really detailed micro question. Tell me an example of how this worked, and then second, what does it take to do it more broadly? And so either half of the question, I open the floor.
So an example of how it's worked is, and continues to work, is we've been able to take particular problems that have been bubbled to the top, in some cases through FEMA, to the National Manufacturing Marketplace, which NAM manages, and trickle that down to our system to be able to find specifically those suppliers that can produce a ventilator part, as an example, or can produce or provide a particular material that's in shortage. And so in the very early stages of this, we've been able to do some of that matchmaking and consummate some of those relationships, if you will. So it's as simple as.
Do you have a problem that, you know, I don't know, I could like put myself on this database and claim I have all this equipment and all these capabilities, and then you scratch the surface and you find, well, no, actually,
Well,
Sue's Products is a total charlatan. And
yeah, you do have that problem, and you've got to have some sort of validation. And one of the things that we have in that member layer is some way that you demonstrate that you actually have those certifications. You might actually put the certification up there so somebody can review your ISO 9000 certification, your AS 9000 certification. So yeah, there's obviously an honor system there, and if somebody doesn't, there's ways of validating that. And also, being an MEP center, you're going out and you're working specifically with some of those companies, helping them populate that information. That may require a sort of a one-on-one interaction to help that validation process as they're populating that. So there's some element of self-policing, some element of that hand-holding where the MEP can play a role. But the certifications, that really comes down to the company demonstrating that. Really, you're not trying to prove that they can do it. They're just trying to prove that they exist. It's up to them to prove that they can do it. Anybody can put a sign out, on their building. So that's probably one example. But I was trying to remember the other part of your question.
Oh, just if we were going to build this out nationally.
Well, I think,
how much does it take to get started? Just give us some ideas of dollars and policies.
Boy, we're spending at an MEP center, we're spending a little more than 100,000 of our dollars to focus in on not just the database, but our supplier development service. Now, I've had some of my colleagues go, "Oh my God, that's a lot of money," but it's not when you think of it in terms of the impact that you can achieve once you succeed at this. What's it cost to put a field agent out there, an MEP field agent? So we're hoping it's sort of an impact multiplier to have a system like this. And we view it as an essential part of what an MEP does. As far as what, the NAM has spent on their national database, I think you'd have to ask them what that cost. But, I think their investment there was significant. To me, part of your question was, where should this reside? This shouldn't reside within the government, but should reside somewhere sort of in between, in the hands of an intermediary or in the hands of business themselves, because there's a proprietary nature to who's in someone's supply chain and how they manage those supply chains. So you can't make a lot of that information public necessarily. And so, I think it would best be managed sort of outside, just like the MEP centers. They're funded by the government, supported by the government, but not necessarily government. There are some exceptions, I guess, where maybe the government manages or the state governments manage MEP centers, but for the most part, they're independent nonprofits that are intermediaries between those assets and that sector.
Yeah, so it's certainly a complicated problem to do this. I mean, we've had our own kind of statewide database of manufacturers that we've been trying to maintain and grow for many years. But companies come and go, new ones arrive, you don't know about them, people change what they make. I mean, it's just so many different pieces of change around individual companies. So unless you just have a full-time army that's going through and filtering out things all the time, you know, you don't really have a whole lot in there that people can rely on. But I mean, as Kevin mentioned, I mean, it's a, you know, it's a good starting point. If we know they exist and there's a place that people could sort to find them, that's, you know, that's close enough. Then they can pick up the phone and call and engage themselves. I mean, you know, so it's just, you know, how much you decide to put in a database like that is really, I think, the key thing. How much information about the company is relevant enough to give people an opportunity to call, because there's just so many different things that change over time. It's just very difficult to maintain.
So an alternative approach that we've taken, and it's based on a lot of what Bill was just saying about the changes and the evolution of companies, and sometimes companies go out of business. One of the approaches we've taken, we've actually have one of our centers serve as a point where they have weekly calls where they discuss companies, what companies are looking for. And on those calls, we have folks from across the state that are what we call solution managers that will identify capabilities or companies that can fill the voids. So we rely heavily on our people to try to fill those. Instead of having a database, we try to rely heavily on our people across the state to really fill those needs.
That's fascinating. So we're very different, sort of the personal approach and the data approach. It's really interesting. You guys have also mentioned, you know, we see this really interesting supply chain work that MEPs are really uniquely positioned to provide. But you've also talked about how supply chains are national. And whereas states, you know, MEPs are state focused and organizations, and there's a lot of benefits to that. They're deeply rooted in their states, know the state manufacturing ecosystem really well. But then you have these national players. There's some proposals in Congress, specifically one is the America Leads Act that Senator Schumer, Menendez, and a whole slew of others have introduced. I guess I'd maybe bring Phil Singerman into the conversation and ask, you know, specifically, how do you think about building or marrying the on the ground localized strength of MEP with the reality of national and international supply chains, and do these bills make sense?
Sure, thank you, Sue. So we're already halfway there, actually, in terms of the structure, because the MEP, and you talked a few moments ago, you talked about network externalities. And the MEP system, along with other systems, for example, the SBDC system, are national networks. They're managed by and funded by a single federal agency. And they have the potential for great coordinated activity. And MEP centers in various spaces, such as cybersecurity and food safety, have developed centers of excellence that leverage the full range of centers. You're quite right. You know, Montana is not the same as Mississippi or Maine or Massachusetts. So one size doesn't fit all, but you know, there is an agglomeration effect. This is actually a point that Rob Atkinson makes in his paper when he says that federal-state partnerships are greater than the sum of their parts. And so there's an important leveraging of network, and that's why some programs and organizations don't have this ability. So there are lots of state-funded programs that aren't connected to one another. And so these become very competitive with one another, and they're also suboptimal. So I think the missing piece right now is kind of the business model of all of these programs, and I would also include the manufacturing institutes. You know, they all have to raise matching funds, which is a good thing, keeps them close to their customers, keeps them on their toes, but also drives their programs in certain directions that don't pursue necessarily their public mission. So I think it requires fundamentally resources. I mean, the model of a membership model or a cost share fee for service model is inherently limited. If you really want to expand to a national level, develop new programs that are breaking new ground, new markets, new services, new customers, you really need seed capital from the federal system to do that. And the bills such as Schumer's America Leads bill and other legislation, they already identify that. And now it's a question of whether the new president and the existing Congress will be able to lean forward. I mean, my concluding comment, there's nothing more important than restoring our domestic manufacturing capability for all sorts of reasons that everybody knows. And so there's, unless we do that, we're going to continue to have the economic and social and political problems that we've had over the last 40 years.
So if I could add to what Phil just talked about, I think what's really, really important as we think about it from a national perspective is when we talk about economic resilience, there are 4, maybe more supply chains that are critical to have that sort of domestic resilient capability. Defense, an obvious one. Food, a big one that's come up. Health and safety, our healthcare supply chain, the extent to which we can handle demands like we would just hit is sort of a base capability that we should have as a country. And then finally, resilience to cyber crimes as an example. And I think if you're going to drive a policy from the federal level, you have to have a federal reason. Manufacturing, you could argue it's important to have manufacturing. I've been arguing it for 40 years, but you really have to have that driving force. And, years ago, and I imagine it still exists, I worked with the Department of Defense in the man-tech world when I was in my 20s. And we used to talk about surge and mobilization and what would happen if, supply chains were cut off, and what would that do to our supply system? And out of that, things like Sematech were born when we realized we had certain vulnerabilities. We weren't able to produce microcircuits. I think what we learned with the pandemic is that exists with food, that exists with healthcare, that exists with pharmaceuticals. I think 85 of their key pharmaceuticals are coming from China that support our Department of Defense. How did that happen? So we got to sort of roll back those things as priorities, I think, that could drive this.
That's really interesting. I'd be intrigued to hear from those of you more on the ground if you've been able to, work in your states to participate in national supply chains. Maybe the lead firm is located in another state, or you're able to do things with multiple suppliers to the same supply chain. How does that work? What would help you do that better? Do you need things? Money always helps, as Phil points out. Are there things other than money that would also help? Or if it hasn't happened, why not?
Maybe let me give a perspective as one of the institutes. The institutes are founded to drive innovation, and inherent in our original mission was we were focused. I call it the innovation valley of death. People tell me I'm old when I say that because it's not a current term, but still, that's what really it is. It's not late stage research. It's not commercialization. The challenge we face is, especially when we go talk to smaller manufacturers, but even the larger ones, they don't want a technology. They want something they can deploy into the field. And so we always run into the challenge where the DoD says you can't use DoD money through your primary contract to fund commercialization. Yet the membership and the manufacturing as a whole is saying we need turnkey solutions. When we go into a small manufacturer and we say we want to prototype or test out new ideas, they're saying if I can't make money from it or make more product or do things quicker, I'm not interested because I can't afford the burden. And so sometimes I think it's not necessarily the lack of money, it's just maybe clarity in the mission so that we can start looking at different phases. And we've been, I hate to say lucky because COVID has had a terrible, burden on the nation, but it has exposed money that is very clearly focused on problem solving with deployable solutions at the end. And all 3 of our CARES Act projects, they're going to have commercial grade solutions that can, in theory, be deployed nationally at the end. And I think that's a huge step forward for us as a nation.
So can I add a comment to what Kevin said? And that is, I think he's absolutely right that you need to align the kind of exquisitely well-organized geographic focus of MEP and similar programs with which is a horizontal dimension, with the vertical dimension of national priorities as reflected in our cabinet structure. So that's a critical path to to focusing resources on optimizing supply chain, food, cybersecurity, and so forth. I would add clean technology. I mean, and I see some nods. I mean, if there's going to be anything coming out of the Congress, there's going to be an infrastructure bill, and that's going to have lots of clean components from the Democratic side. And we're going to need suppliers to build that stuff that is necessary for all the full range of moving towards a carbon-free economy. So I would add that to Kevin's list as an area where the networks should be thinking about what do we need to do to put into place those capabilities and identify those companies that can contribute to a clean infrastructure bill.
Really
yeah, Phil and Kevin are spot on those how critical those technology areas are, and that we really need to do a better job of having the capabilities in our country. But I would add, Susan, you were asking about the NIST MEP network. One of the benefits of being part of that network is they have a portal where they have supply scouting efforts going on, where we almost daily receive emails of companies from across the country that are looking for new suppliers or different suppliers to solidify their supply chain. And so we have teams that regularly respond to those. So it's a tremendous opportunity to really work as a network to make sure that the onshoring is being done, supply chains being localized, and efforts like that.
That's really cool. I think that thinking about this reshoring and adding jobs is key if we're going to have our response to the climate crisis add jobs as opposed to be let's just import a whole lot of stuff from Germany and China. I think what I will do now is turn it over to first thank our panelists. Really appreciate the wealth of both granular example and big overview that we've seen, and turn it back to Bill Bonvillian for the last word.
Thanks, Sue. And thanks to our panelists, and to you, Sue, and to Steve, our moderators, and to my co-coordinator, David Adler, and especially to ITIF for the kind of vision to put on this kind of program. The forum today told us that states are becoming, a really fertile ground for growth in advanced manufacturing and related manufacturing workforce issues. So this kind of virtual workshop tried to share best practices from a number of innovative states and programs that are actively developing advanced manufacturing strategies and workforce efforts. The workshop also explored ways that advanced manufacturing in the US, including through the manufacturing institutes, could better scale through further state level interactions. And to return to a theme that David pointed us to, the old style state economic development programs were, to summarize it brutally, steal companies from each other. But the new style programs that we're hearing about today are really all about building state capacity for workforce, for manufacturing supply chains. And just to recall some of the key points made today, on panel one, Farhad Vizigu of MassTech, told us about MassBridge, a very innovative cross-state agency, across the state effort that's owned by companies and community colleges, universities, technical high schools, to really build an advanced manufacturing education system, which isn't really in place anywhere at this point. Ira Moskowitz of ARM, the Robotics Institute, recalled for us that technician training is just a critical issue in these new areas like robotics, and identifying the best education programs in robotics, which is something ARM is up to, and validating them, creating in effect a new competency model to increase the skilled robotics base, a key intervention kind of program. Amy Firestone of Apprentice South Carolina, which is a leading state on implementing apprenticeship programs, told us about building new youth apprenticeship programs starting in high school, statewide, plus a new pre-apprenticeship program for those from poverty backgrounds to get them ready for these fuller apprenticeship programs and real job opportunities. And Michael Britt Crane closed out the panel from DoD Mantech. And he told us about Mantech's efforts to develop models for states, pushing the manufacturing institutes into workforce education with demand-driven programs that are really informed by industry demand for talent. And they're very regionally and state-focused, using digital learning platforms from the institutes to host new programs for education and advanced manufacturing. And then moving to our second panel, Phil Singerman portrayed the big challenges facing U.S. manufacturing and the need to drive a supply chain focus at the heart of that, and how the states can really tackle this, if they've got some federal programs that provide some further incentives. Matt Watson from New York State summarized a wide range of New York State programs, from supporting manufacturing institutes to startups with new product lines. Just a wide reach of efforts that his state is making. Phil Mintz from North Carolina's MEP, strategies about, for example, product redesign, encouraging small manufacturers in a kind of a dialogue approach to move towards resilience, encouraging new manufacturing technologies in these SMEs and to get the workers that they need. So in effect, it's a new supply chain kind of model that his state is pursuing. Kevin Carr from Florida MEP, he talked about how Florida, he found, was below average in manufacturing productivity. Yet they've got, SpaceX, Blue Origin, Space Coast, substantial defense manufacturing base. It's a significant manufacturing state, and yet it wasn't participating in its own supply chains. How to strengthen those supply chains? And they developed a database system of matching supplier capabilities with company needs, for example, to focus supplier capabilities around a database. Bernardino Barada from MXD, the Manufacturing Institute based in Illinois, took us through the whole design through production need of digital technologies to follow that digital thread. And he told us about the ability to increase digital technologies that can enable firms to be much more flexible, to pivot really fast to new opportunities and for crises and challenges. How to make that data actionable, how to build common data centers for companies, and how to get them shared, across companies, really mapping supply chains for firms. And then, a closing point that Sue made, and she made some important ones, was really how to build a true manufacturing ecosystem, kind of a new manufacturing commons, and the programs that could enable this, many of which we've been discussing today, and a lot of which must be rooted in states and localities. So thanks everybody for participating.